Dave and Chana Mason. Welcome to Jewish Money Matters. How are you guys?
Doing fabulous.
It's great to be here. It's always great to have a conversation with you.
It's so fun. You're one of my favorite couples, power duo. I mean, Dave, you don't know this, but Chana and I, or maybe you do know this, but Chana and I have talked extensively about money. Not only has she been on the show before, but she's been so wonderful to come, I think, twice to my online programs and talk to my students, and not just talk to them, wow them, help them through all the, mindset blocks and how to think think healthier. Can we say that, Hannah? Have better relationship with our thoughts. So it's so great to have you both, because I know that you're both on a journey, on a mission, as you describe it, to learn, grow, and teach. And one of the areas in which you've done a lot of learning and growing and teaching is actually in the area of money and finance. You've written a book together, which we've mentioned here on the show, The Cash Machine, one of my favorite books. Yes, awesome book. You've put online courses together. You coach people individually also in this area. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun. Are you up for this?
Yeah, totally.
Amazing. So I thought a great place to start, guys, would be, since you have defined your mission so beautifully, learn, grow, teach. Why don't we start with the learning, the growth that happened in the area of money management and financial literacy, your relationship with money, that then has prompted you to educate so many in this regard. Was that something that learning was prompted individually? Did it start together as a couple? What led you in this financial self-help, if you will, learning?
Right.
So it was definitely something we did as a couple, with both of us making really poor individual choices that came together into a massive financial mess for our family. Mm-hmm. And we both came into our marriage with a whole bunch of preconceived notions about money, about wealth, about wealthy people. And all of these assumptions, they were basically living in the subconscious. We didn't even realize they were there. And they seemed so like truths of reality, as though it was gravity, that we just used them to drive all of our behavior and drive our choices without even questioning them or thinking them or talking about them. Because why do you need to talk about gravity? Everybody knows it's there. It's like not something you need to discuss. Mm-hmm. But it turned out I had a whole bunch of beliefs that were driving my behavior, and Dave had some similar but some different beliefs that were driving his behavior. And our beliefs were leading us to make really poor financial choices. And a lot of times those came from fear. My family fled Colombia when I was 5 years old, and I lost my home. And so for me, replacing a home and having a home that I owned that gave me a lot of security was really, really important. And to hell with how much it costs or what it was going to do to our finances. And it came from like a place of fear, and it's not good to make financial choices from fear, but a lot of times we do that. Mm-hmm. And we both really were uncomfortable with building wealth and wanted to just take care of everyone else. And that led Dave into some of his business choices.
Exactly. And I was at a place where my business was doing really well for quite a while. We were actually bringing in a ton of money. Mm-hmm. And we were doing fine until we were making more money than we needed. As long as we were just getting by, we were doing great. The business was growing steadily. But then we started making twice what we needed, 3 times, 4 times. And that's when I started feeling really uncomfortable, because I didn't know what to do with all this excess money. And I felt greedy having so much when so many people I knew had so little. And so I felt like, okay, well, the highest way to give tzedakah is to give someone a job. Why don't I hire a lot of these people in my community? And I'd hire people I didn't need and then give them really poor management because I didn't actually need them to do anything. And I took a very streamlined, easy to run company and made it big, fat, bloated thing that was incredibly stressful, and the business was just losing a ton of money. And this, together with the house issues that we ran into, and I think one of our biggest issues was when we were growing up, money was somewhat a taboo subject.
Yeah.
I remember my parents had certain friends who they'd mention, were really wealthy. And I'd want to go up to them and ask them, well, how much do you have? How'd you get it? Where did it come from? My parents were like, no. You don't walk up and say that. You don't talk about money. Right. It's not a polite subject to be bringing up. Now, you obviously with a spouse, it makes a lot of sense to be talking about it, but there's no magic switch that you flip when you get married that you're suddenly taking a subject that you have no comfort talking about, and it suddenly becomes comfortable because it should be.
Exactly.
We didn't have the language, we didn't have the comfort, and our communication around money was really poor. We didn't even have the same meanings behind the same terms necessarily. And so we were both flailing. And sometimes, like with the house, I wanted giving in to a lot of things that Hannah wanted because I felt like pressured and I didn't want to be fighting over it. And I wanted to be a good husband and a good provider. But we made really dumb choices and got ourselves in a lot of debt that was then very stressful to be digging ourselves out of.
It's interesting because in the business, I did the same thing. I studied business. I worked in management consulting, and I would look at Dave's business and I was like, something's not okay. And I would ask him, can we take a look at your books? And he would say, no, there's so much blessing in what is hidden. And so he wouldn't let me see his books, but he also really wasn't looking at the books because, it was just too embarrassing. It was too awkward. And so neither of us was really questioning each other's financial decisions because it was just, there was so much discomfort. And it was one of the things that motivated us to make this book a relationship book, not just a book where people can learn about money. We wanted it to be a novel that's at its core, a love story where two people are trying to figure out, can they be in relationship? Because we see that at the center of a lot of people's financial woes, there's a relationship involved.
Yes.
There's other people involved.
Yes. It sounds to me like you've described a typical couple. I mean, it's like every couple we know kind of operates in a very similar way. So why don't you help us get into the initial, because now you're starting to recognize the problem, which is already way advanced. Most people just, the problem is there and we just keep at it and, spinning in the hamster wheel, right? You start recognizing that there's an area of work, of growth here. So what were those initial conversations like? What were those initial shifts like? Because, I can only imagine there's a lot of discomfort and yet hand holding, and we can get through this. There's a big shift that has to happen. And very often people don't want to go into that space, even though we all know in this virtual room that there's so much growth as a couple on the other side of that space. So take us there a little bit.
So what's interesting about us is that we're novelists. We write books and we write books together. And so if you look at most money books, they're written by money experts, people who've been in financial experts for 20 years, and they're usually in very narrow areas because most financial experts have a very narrow area of expertise. But really got to the point of, once we kind of talked to each other and acknowledged that a lot of our money woes came from the fact that we just didn't understand what we were doing. We never got a solid education, and we were really just flailing out there and trying to figure things out, but really not even having a strong basis for doing so. That's when it was first me, and then the two of us started writing The Cash Machine before we knew anything about money. We found that like writing a novel on a topic just makes you dive so deep into that subject and learn everything about it. So The Cash Machine was the vehicle for learning. It wasn't the product of being an expert. It was a product of being really ignorant and being knocked down by our lack of money understanding and saying, okay, we need to get an education. And if we needed to get an education only for our particular circumstances, it would have taken like this much effort. But to write a book that anybody can pick up and read and they can learn things about their own circumstances, we need to get this much education. So The Cash Machine was the driver. We always say in Judaism that if there's a good question, you're going to learn something much better than if you're just opening up a text and reading it on its own. So because we were writing this book, we had all these questions like, okay, in this circumstance, what would somebody do? In this circumstance, what would somebody do? Whether they applied to us or not. And it really forced us just to learn a tremendous amount.
Amazing. So what would you say of all the things that you've learned and mastered, would you say were those that you've really seen as they move the needle, that you're implementing them in your life, and you saw like, of all the, there's a plethora of things that we can talk about when it comes to finances, right? But then there's the things that we're particularly fans of, because when we implemented, we saw that they really helped our relationship. They helped our bank statements. They helped us in such a complete way. What would you say for the Masons are some of those things?
So I would say two things. One, and I'm very much a mindset person. It's a huge thing that I help people with in my coaching practice. So it's a little bit my bias. Mm-hmm. The number one thing is that a couple have a very clear vision for their money. And this is also true for individuals. So Dave and I run this money mindset challenge, and it's for individuals, but people can also do it as a couple. And in either situation, if you have a very clear vision for your money, that drives absolutely everything else. So the same is true if you have a mission statement for your life, or if there's a mission statement for a corporation. So if a company has a mission statement, that drives every single choice they make from then forward. And so that's the number one thing. And for us personally, we chose financial independence as our mission. And it drives every single financial choice we make. It literally has shaped the way I see the world. Mm-hmm. And had we known about financial independence as an option when we first got married, it would have been very easy for the both of us to sign up and say yes, because it's such an exciting premise. And what financial independence is when your passive income, meaning the income that you get from investments that you don't work at, it's not your active job, that income exceeds your cost of living. And as soon as we learned about financial independence, we drove all of our financial choices to move us in that direction. Mm. And that started with the cash machine, which we only started writing 5 years ago?
Less,
like 4 years ago. And that has totally shifted our financial picture. We went from being in massive debt to moving closer and closer towards financial independence to kind of being there at this point. And that's huge. That's in such a short period of time to totally alter our financial picture. And it excites us. It feels like a game because we're both moving towards a goal. And then it makes us feel like a team. And our son is also a part of it. And he's thinking in terms of financial independence and driving his financial choices and his investments in the same direction. So it's really exciting.
There's so much to unpack here. I mean, you guys, okay. First of all, let's go back. Let's take a few steps back to the first thing you said, Hannah, about the vision, right? We had to get, a couple has to get really clear on their vision for their money. And you guys did that. But how does a couple even get there? For somebody reading and saying, well, I don't, like you guys mentioned, I don't know how to talk to my husband about money. We hardly do it. We avoid it. Anytime we do it, it's explosive. Now you're telling me I have to get clear on my vision. I don't know myself. I don't know for him. How does a person bridge that?
Great question. So one thing we've started doing recently, because really it wasn't just that we were in financial distress early in our marriage. The financial stress caused the biggest loss of shalom bayit of anything we've experienced in our marriage. It was definitely brought on the biggest struggles we've had in our marriage. And we feel like this is something that we can help other people with. And so we've had a practice recently that we started inviting over every new couple in our community that gets married. We invite them over for dinner. And we just sit and talk to them about our personal story and our struggle and how not being on the same page about money really sent us totally off kilter, and started giving them the tools to figure out their vision. Now, we explain about financial independence, but we're very clear. Financial independence does not have to be everyone's vision. Mm-hmm. We're not like a one goal fits all type family. But if you've got two people in a couple and they've got different visions, that's when there's a real problem. So we always give them a copy of the cash machine, and the cash machine just is meant to cover a lot of topics. Most areas in the cash machine, you're not going to read and feel like, okay, I'm an expert, I can now go do it. It's going to expose you to a whole lot of ideas, with the idea that if something really triggers you and you say, okay, this is a good idea for me, we can go deeper there. So we encourage couples to actually pick up and read the cash machine together and discuss it chapter by chapter and really find, okay, what are the areas that is speaking to me? what do you think about the financial independence thing? What do you think about this path A versus path B, the Anthony path versus the Dylan path, for instance, taking a few of the characters as an example, and hear what each person has to say, and then discuss, well, what do we want to do? And okay, how do we go and look into that together? We just bring the things that are subsurface up to the surface. In fact, one of our favorite tools for that is something we do in the very first day of Money Mindset Madness. It's a little tool that we've named Mason's Magical Money Magnet. And it's a quiz of just 40 questions that each one is just, money is the root of all evil. Do you totally agree with that? Do you totally disagree with that? Or you're somewhere in between? You just rate yourself on all these 40 beliefs. And the first time we ever took a quiz like that, actually Ari Lev was with us as well. And the three of us just had such a good time going through the questions and looking at each other's answers and seeing, wow, you scored really high on this. Wow, you scored really low on that, and debating it and discussing it, but taking all of these beliefs that were kind of beneath the surface and bringing them up so we can look at them and examine them. And that is how we started dialogue.
Yeah. So here we had our 11-year-old son who had the healthiest money mindset of the three of us. And so
I love that.
I think one of the beliefs where I scored really highly was, it's not fair for me to have a lot when others have less.
Wow.
And our son looks at that.
Very into fairness.
Yes, very into fairness. And our son, he looks at that and he starts laughing. Not in a mocking way. He just thought it was so preposterous that anyone would believe such a thing. So he starts laughing, and Dave and I look at each other and we start laughing. It's just kind of a natural outgrowth of what happened. And so it allowed us to feel very light around what could otherwise be a heavy topic. And it was also really nice because age 11 is that transition point from being a child, having all of your beliefs in the subconscious, to transitioning into teenagehood and adulthood, where all of these subconscious beliefs are driving your behavior. And he was able to see that a lot of the beliefs that we were trying to feed him were garbage, because we put it up above the surface and we talked about it. And he was like, that's ridiculous. And then he could see, oh, that's why my mom does this and this and this. Oh, that's silly. I don't need to copy that behavior of my mother's because it's coming from a nonsensical place. I don't need to do that uncomfortable stance like my father does when he does X, because that's also coming from a nonsensical place. So one thing I noticed that I worked really hard at doing is, when I give charity, to have a huge smile on my face and to really look at the person I'm giving money to and engage them in conversation. That took a lot of effort on my part, because really on the inside, it was immensely uncomfortable. But because I forced myself to do, I faked it until I made it. And now I'm immensely, really caring about these people and engage in conversation with the beggars I pass every day. My son learned that on the outside, and it shaped his perception about beggars on the inside. He experiences no shame around beggars, and he doesn't see them as shameful characters. So it's like even our faces and our behavior and our body language communicates to our kids what we're supposed to be believing around money. So just talking about money, just saying, what do you believe about money? What do I believe about money? Just being willing to talk about it. I think the biggest thing that happens when we sit with other couples is that it's the first time for some of them that they've ever talked about money, other than talking about the finances related to the wedding night itself. And they're like, oh, wait, it's okay to talk about? And so they start asking questions, they start saying things, they get giggly and uncomfortable in front of each other. And it's like, great, that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to open conversation. So what the book allows people to do is, here, all these characters are talking with each other around money, and they feel like real people. So they give you an opening to begin to have that conversation amongst yourselves also.
Yeah, what I'm hearing loud and clear is that normalizing this area of life, right? It's a normal, ordinary thing that should be talked about. Just like we can say, I have a headache today. It's a beautiful day outside. It's important, and not in a heavy way, in a great, this is part of life type of way, just like dating is, just like all of the beauty of life. There is so much in that, and it should not be this taboo. Like you said, Dave, at the beginning, we grew up with this topic being so taboo. So I love this idea of getting people to start the dialogue with giving them something neutral or par, like a novel, right? Like, let's read this book and let's talk about it. You guys talk about it, come back to us. Let's talk about it, right? It's for people who are really uncomfortable, for couples who are really uncomfortable, it's definitely a great place to start because it's not personal. It's not, nobody needs to get defensive yet. We're just talking about those characters in the book. We're not talking about me or you. We're not pointing fingers yet.
We also decided to, on purpose, this was really Dave's genius. The characters discussing the most difficult money concepts are the most colorful characters in the book. Mm-hmm. So it really, discharge, what's the word? It kind of like took the charge away from this, so the tax expert is this character named Vinny, who's this kind of slimy Italian American guy. He talks like this and he's like talks like this and and like you're like engaging with him, and so but he's talking about taxes, right? And so it's just such a chill way to learn about taxes because you're so busy laughing.
Well, he's talking about taxes because he's got a vendetta against the IRS, and he's sworn he'd never give them a dime because his mom got audited when he was a kid, and she lost her house. So he's got like it's a good Italian mafia revenge story, but you're learning tax law through it. Mm-hmm. So it's all the ways that he has worked out how to make investments that have incredible tax benefits as well. And that's a whole aspect of investment that was so new to me when I was researching the cash machine. I was just absolutely blown away by how, well, if I choose investment B rather than investment A, suddenly my taxes just will plummet in half. And
now we design all of our financial choices around that. It's amazing. One of the biggest changes in our lives has been seeing members of our family who I think they were really pitying us and looking down at our financial picture, to be honest, like behind closed doors. I'm sure that's what was happening. They've been now calling Dave to ask her financial advice.
Wow. Simply
because of the research that he did in writing this book. And there's more research than what's in the book itself, but there's so much content in the book itself. If you really take notes and pay attention to every detail, it's really all in there. It's amazing.
Well, I think you just hit on a very important point, which is, sometimes when we embark on this journey, most often we are probably going to go against the tide, right? If we are a couple who all of a sudden gains the awareness that we need help in this area of life, that there has to be a better way, most likely we're going against, our in-laws, our parents, our sister-in-laws, and they're like, we've been doing things the way it's been done, and we realize this is not working, right? And so you just said something pretty refreshing that suggests that if you embark in such a journey, you might be going against the tide for a while, but if you're really clear on your why, on your vision, on your purpose, and you stick through it, at the end of it, you really are going to be the light that's illuminating a path for other people. So, sometimes this can be a really great motivator. And it's, first of all, it's your kids, as you mentioned, right? You'll be a light for your children. You're changing the whole family dynamics and legacy and the mindset that's being fostered, right, for your offspring, but also those people around you. At the end of the day, they are watching, and you communicate a shift. There's a shift that happens. So I love that point.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting to be a part of something like that.
So let's go back to the nitty gritty, because you mentioned investing in certain ways that are smarter tax wise. And obviously you also, let's mention the added layer of complexity that you live in Israel, which maybe requires even an added layer of knowledge in that regard, right? As Americans living in Israel, all that, but we're not going to get into that specifically, but I just wanted to point that. So going again to some of the things that now that you said, you're sort of almost at that point of financial independence, whatever that independence number you might have defined it to be, right? What have been some of those wins. I think it's so important to celebrate like the milestones that you feel like, okay, you talk about the fact that now you can talk about money. This is very important. And that you have a vision aligned together, but there perhaps have been other milestones that you said, wow, the fact that we did this, the fact that we put this in place and this in place really we have to celebrate. We have to acknowledge that this really, again, was a turning point.
One thing I'll point out is that the first private equity deal we ever did. So this is an area of investment that we got involved into only through the cash machine. Up till then, investments was largely about stock market and such. And we started looking at private equity deals. And our taxes, the first year we did that, our US taxes, our Israeli taxes are a completely different story that I don't want to get into at the moment. But we file these US taxes, and we were just absolutely in shock how investing money in a business, it created all this depreciation, and just the amount of money we saved before we'd even gotten a single return. We hadn't even started getting any return from our first investment, but just months after making the investment, we saw the tax implications and we're like, wow.
Huge.
And that
life-alteringly massive.
And we got to the point of saying, well, we're almost in the US, at least, it feels like I'm investing with the government share of the money. I make a certain amount of income, a certain amount is for me to keep, a certain amount is for the government to keep. Oh, but if you use a certain class of investments, wow, you can take that portion that would otherwise go to the government, and that can be your investment capital. And it was just completely mind-boggling for me is how effective it was, how quickly.
So one thing that we did is when we got this house that sunk us into massive debt. So we had a house that sunk us into massive debt. And we had a business that sunk us into massive debt. Dave worked really hard to streamline his business. He unfortunately had to fire a bunch of people, close an office, shift a whole bunch of things, but he really streamlined the business so that it was finally profitable again. And slowly we paid off the business debts, but we're still holding on to this house that had all of this house debt. And we tried to figure out, is there a way we could streamline the house? Like, could we chop it up into apartments? Is there something we could do? And it just wasn't feasible with that specific property. And even though it pained us because we put a lot of love into this house, in addition to putting a lot of money into this house, we decided to sell the house. And what that did is that got us out of being in this pattern of constantly being in a debt snowball and just constantly sinking into more and more debt and not being able to grow wealth. So we sold this house and ended up not that much, but what we ended up with, we put into these private equity deals. And for the first time in our marriage, we saw our money growing. We saw our money making money without us having to do anything. And that was a really big deal because people don't realize how much real estate or businesses can really give you an insane return on your investment in a way that nothing else can. And it just requires a little bit of learning, and it's not impossible. It's not so difficult to learn. It's just wrapping your head around it and getting exposed to private equity opportunities. And that's what we've just consistently been investing in. And we'll even sometimes borrow money to invest in private equity deals because the returns are better than what we owe the bank with that borrowed money. So that's another thing, like Robert Kiyosaki talks about, how part of building wealth is like strategically taking on debt. There's good debt and there's bad debt. And we've been playing the good debt game really, really well. And like when we first started doing it, I'm like, we have like what, $25,000 invested. I was like, oh, we're never going to get anywhere. But like it grows. It really does. And it's amazing.
So yeah, Dave, you had a point here. You want to say something?
Yeah, so I just want to talk a bit about the financial independence idea, because what's interesting for us is, as much as it was a game and this challenge, can we get to this point? The closer we've gotten to it, the less important it has been for us to hit it.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is because we've gotten to the point where we now have all this passive income coming in from all these various investments. We also have some active income sources that we're really like and we're attached to, and we have no interest in getting rid of. For instance, Chana's a coach, and every time she does a coaching session, she comes out so lit up, and she's like, it is so clearly like her life's work, and we have no interest in moving away from that. But now that we're so close to financial independence, we can say, okay, you know, we can spend a bit more than we were before. We can, you know, last year we were entering the lockdown during the middle of the winter here in Israel. And we said, you know what, let's pick up and go to South Africa and have a family vacation rather than being locked down here in the winter and really getting on each other's nerves. And so we took this 3-month trip to South Africa during this COVID lockdown in Israel, and we had this great family adventure. And at a certain point, we weren't like, oh no, but we can take that money and reinvest it and get the financial independence faster. We didn't need to hit it because we were so close. We were at the point where we were saying that if everything we had fell to pieces, we had enough passive income coming in that we'd be okay. But we now got to the point of saying, wow, we've got this passive income coming in, but we're actually really like writing books and teaching courses and taking on coaching clients. And so we have no need to get rid of these income sources. So we don't have to like keep our spending super duper low so that we hit our goal. And then suddenly from one day to the next, we go from spending nothing to spending extravagantly. It's like, no, we were able to see, okay, we can actually start loosening the cords a bit, knowing that we can always pull back if we need to. But it's interesting to see how our goals shifted a bit because we got so close to this goal. We said, okay, you know what? Our momentum is probably just going to carry us there anyway. We don't need to really slug away at it. We've gotten ourselves out of the debt. We've gotten ourselves to the place where we're feeling pretty comfortable. We can really start shifting already, and our goals have shifted and changed accordingly.
I love that point because it's not so much about the goal, but about who you become in the process, right? And the reevaluations that happen constantly as we're working towards that. That's where the beauty is, right? And having those conversations as a family. Well, what's important? Well, family is the most important thing at the end of the day. It's not about that financial goal. So maybe our family right now needs 3 months in South Africa. And guess what? We can afford it. It doesn't mean that we're sacrificing our goal. It means that thanks to having worked, we can do this now. And we can really savor the experience. So to those listening, I could already see the questions in listeners' minds like, wait. I have the debt. I have the big house. I have the very tense conversations with my spouse. And now we're talking about private equity, focusing on one type of investing, which is, by the way, and I want to go there at some point because really there is something to be said for focusing on one area to build wealth rather than, just kind of diversifying. And I'm using that term loosely, but even before we get there, talk to us about the process because there's so much that goes into this. When you say selling the house, not always can people sell the house and come out with some money from the house. Very often people have tons of credit card debt and no cash really. Like they're like they can't even lose their job because next month they won't be able to pay the mortgage. That's how deep into this hamster wheel they are. So what was going on in that regard? Was there credit card debt? Was there only the mortgage? What was happening?
So we were lucky enough to not have credit card debt. That wasn't really a thing for us. Mm-hmm. So it was really just the mortgage.
So you knocked out the
at a certain point we did for my business.
Oh, that's right. Your business did.
Yeah,
have
when the
credit
business
card debt,
when we were trying to keep up and the business couldn't keep up with all the payments we had to make. Yeah, we built up credit card debt too.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
So you would say the first step for you guys was taking care of the business debt, making sure the business was profitable again, really running a leaner business. And that's a process that maybe took you, I don't know, half a year, whatever it took you, and then focusing on getting rid of those mortgage payments.
So here's the thing. The mortgage payments actually weren't that bad. What was really bad for me is that we ran into such a hole with fixing up the house. And we had nowhere to get, no bank would lend us the money on that. And I wound up turning to family for loans. And we felt really, really guilty about that. I knew it caused my family they helped us out, but it was financial stress there. That was actually much worse for me than keeping up with a higher mortgage rate. Once the business was doing better and I shifted things around there, we could have kept up with some strong monthly payments. But the fact that I felt the need to entirely be paying this off because I felt just so guilty that I was causing family financial stress because they came in to bail us out, that was really a much higher pressure thing. It got us to the point that for years, we spent no money on anything because every additional dollar we could spend would help relieve that kind of that pressure from family to be paying money back. So that was a very difficult thing emotionally.
And created a lot of tension between us also. There was just like a lot of guilt and awkwardness, and it didn't feel good.
And I'm happy that you went there, because I think this is something that happens so often. And again, it's not talked about, right? We get into the house, but the house, we didn't really get into the house. We brought some other people into the house.
They're taking up a lot of space.
But it was a funny thing. Once we had this, and once I had all of this guilt around the money that I owed my family, well, at that point, I could be making money again. Here's what I mean. Going back to what I was saying at the beginning, when we were just making enough to get by and pay our expenses, we were doing great. The business was thriving. Once we were making a lot more than we needed, because I wasn't comfortable with having all this excess money, and I started feeling greedy, and I started feeling like, who am I to have all this money when so many people are struggling? Suddenly we made the business big and bloated. Then we got ourselves into lots of debt also with the house. Now I was okay making a lot of money. Psychologically, my psychological beliefs that it was not okay for me to have a lot of money, well, that wasn't stopping the business growth anymore, because now the business money wasn't coming to me. It was going to pay back other people. So it wasn't leading to me having excess cash. So I was okay emotionally. Like once we got into that place of being in debt, I was able to very quickly get the business doing really well again. Not well enough to get us out of debt all that fast, because we'd acquired so much of it. But psychologically, it's like, okay, I gave myself permission again to be making a lot of money again, because now I owed this money to somebody else. I'd gotten myself in a tough spot. But before I was in that tough spot, when we had all this money coming in and we just felt uncomfortable with it, well, that's when we actually tanked things.
Well, I think this is a very nuanced and important point, because it just, so many of us can get into that without even realizing. And you didn't realize, obviously, which is why you're mentioning it, right? It's like, okay, so now the business is doing great. There's that discomfort with this. Oh, but we're going to do the typical thing. We'll buy the big house. And so all the excess money is just going to pay for the big house. And now we got to work on the house. Well, I don't have that much cash flow to work on the house. Maybe my brother will lend me some money, but I still have a pretty steady business. So I'll be able to pay him back. And there's where the hamster wheel starts, right?
So one of the challenges that I see that, what Dave expressed is a challenge I see a lot in the clients that I work with and the young couples that we invite over, is that people are comfortable making just enough to get by. And just enough to get by is a total figment of each individual's imagination. For someone living in sub-Saharan Africa, just enough to get by is enough to buy, the basket that you need to collect, the water from the well a mile away. And, and for another person, it's like they need a mansion. That's enough to get by. And so what happens is we're making just enough to get by. And that works really well when you're a single person and you know what your expenses are, and then you get two single people and they come together and just enough to get by, they're fine. And then boom, you start adding children to that. And what used to be just enough to get by isn't enough to get by anymore, but their income hasn't gone up to accommodate, despite the fact that now one of them might not be working or is working half time, or they've hired someone to do childcare and they have to live in a bigger place. So their expenses go up really fast. And I think for a lot of people, that's when the debt begins. And a lot of it has to do with that mindset of how comfortable they are with money. And also, I notice people aren't necessarily so creative with money, and you can't be creative with something you're not comfortable talking about. So when you're talking about the person who can't sell their house, okay, well, can they chop it up into pieces and rent it out as apartments, even if it's just studio apartments? Can they take in boarders? Can they take in tenants? Could they rent out their house and go live in a small apartment? We had friends that did that. They were in financial straits. They rented out their house. They lived in a very small apartment until they got their finances back in order. There are so many different things that you can do, but you have to be willing to not keep up with the Joneses or keep up some sort of presentation. And that really comes back to this conversation about talking about money. We have a friend who does financially very well for himself. And he says all the time, like when we finally started talking to him about money, he was actually really happy to talk to us about money and all of the wisdom that he'd accumulated over the years. We happen to, as human beings, love to share the wisdom we've accumulated over the years, as Dave and I are relishing right now, right? And he said, no one ever comes to him to talk to him about money, despite the fact that he's so happy to share his knowledge. One day, his housekeeper came to him. And this is somebody living in the United States. His housekeeper came to him. She said, I've been working for you for a number of years. I'd really like a raise. And he said, no. And she said, no. And he said, yeah, you clean my house. I can find a million other people to do exactly what you do. You're not worth more than whatever, $10 an hour. I don't remember how much he's paying her. And he said, but I will do one thing for you. I will give you a financial education if you want one. Whenever you want to talk about money, I'm here. And she took him up on the offer. And over time, no, it gets better, because he said to her, how much money do you have? And she said, I have $75,000 US in the bank. This is a woman from Latin America. And he said, you see all the people in my neighborhood, everyone's driving a Lexus and has a big fancy house. You're wealthier than the vast majority of them, because they're all living on so much debt. And she was shocked. She could not have imagined such a thing. Long story short, she made a whole bunch of investments in her hometown, started buying apartments and renting them out, started buying equipment, renting it out. And eventually she came to her boss one day and said, I'm quitting. I'm financially independent and I don't need this job anymore.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a story. What a story. I mean, talk about a motivation. Like I was talking to a student the other day, she's having a hard time charging more in her business and growing her business because she really doesn't need the money because her husband's income is very high. I mean, it definitely covers their expenses and they can invest and they can save, and there's not that sense of urgency. But I talked to her about like, what can drive you here to, give to others, sponsor others, give charity, like where is that motivation? And then I'm getting sidetracked, but I think just hearing that story of, what can motivate sometimes people can hear that story and say, wow, I want to be that person who can give that gift to others, but I have to become that person first. Right. So, I have to become that person who can give that knowledge. Now let's go back to you talked about investing. You even shared that story about that woman who started investing in her country. For you, investing in businesses has been the thing that you've become passionate about, that you've seen has really given you a return. And we talked about, the debt, that you didn't have much debt to deal with, in sense of like that credit card debt. It was just family debt that you were able to handle at that point. What about the traditional stuff that we often talk about? And I know you're so familiar with, like, well, you have to have some cash save up. You can't just take your first $10,000 and just put it in another company and not have anything. You have to have some sort of cushion. And, are you investing maybe in the stock market and like diversified stuff that at least, like it's there growing? Like, how did you go about those pieces, if at all?
So first of all, when it comes to having some cash ready, yes, it's an absolute must. You never know when things are going to turn. We just experienced this with COVID. So many people saw their cash plummet overnight out of nowhere. But you don't necessarily need to have that cash sitting. And that's one of the things I teach. I have a financial fundamentals course. I'm very into that people should have a certain amount of cash they have access to. And by the way, it shouldn't be too much. You never want to have no cash you can have, but you don't want to have more than, you want to have usually between 3 and 6 months cash is what people say. You have more than that and your money's just not working for you. But in my mind, that money doesn't have to be sitting at all. I know for us, one of our main sources of that is a line of credit that we have. And we can draw on this anytime we need it. So we've got the ability to pull cash. So we always have cash we have access to whenever there's an issue that we need it for. If our income was to drop, we'd have sources of cash coming in, but we don't have our money sitting and doing nothing. And that's a really important aspect. Another thing you brought up in terms of diversification. So we are very diversified in terms of our investments. Nonetheless, we're diversified by owning shares of a lot of different businesses, a lot of different real estate projects, I actually really like things that have both aspects to them. Things that are not just a rental apartment, but something that has the tax benefits of real estate, because real estate has fabulous tax benefits, but also is operated as a business. So we're involved, for instance, in some nursing home projects. You buy the nursing home, that's real estate, so it depreciates, but it's managed as a business. And so it draws in a lot more income than, say, a housing unit does, where people are just living in that, all the services, all the medical care goes back to the bottom line. But we're diversified across a lot of different investments. And typically, I was just absolutely shocked when I learned the difference between the valuation of a public company, like on the stock market, and a valuation of a small private company. So for instance, my primary business, I actually sell cabinet hardware online. If I was to go sell my business, when I tried selling it, my business was worth between 2.5 and 3 times my annual profits. But a public company can be worth easily 30 times its annual profits. Now, just think about that. It's, if, say, a private business, a small business is making $100,000 a year, it might only be worth $250,000. But a business that is making $100 million a year might be worth, 30 times that, 50 times that, 100 times that. And the multiples just go up so fast, which means as an investor, you want to be on the flip side of that. In other words, if you were able to buy a small business you could get basically a 40% return the first year. Whereas if you were to invest in a public company, like on the stock market, because they give such small returns, every dollar they make, the valuation goes nuts. The returns are much, much smaller.
Right. Also, you're putting a much less amount into that business. So yeah, you're buying a tiny percentage of a public company, whereas you could buy a bigger chunk or invest a much bigger percentage into a private company.
That being said, we are invested in the stock market, just not as much as our other things. So we put in the maximum that we're allowed every single year into a Roth IRA, and thank God Dave's mom is amazing with the stock market, and she thinks it is so fun. And so we've just asked her if she would just manage our portfolio for us. So all of that is just, under her management. But if she wasn't available to manage our stock portfolio, we would put every single penny of our stock portfolio into a Vanguard, S&P 500 index fund, really simple. Nobody's managing it. Simple thing. And we'd constantly just be having money flowing from our bank account into that. And that's money that you can access. You can pull that money out if you need to. It's not as liquid as, let's say, a line of credit, but it's definitely part of our portfolio, just not as much as these businesses, because something about the stock market for me feels like gambling. It feels kind of random. The valuations of businesses are all over the place. But with these kinds of businesses, it's much more stable. We can look at the numbers. We understand the numbers. They're much more consistent. And it's exciting to be a part of a business in what feels like a real way. We actually own a chunk of a business, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I love boring businesses. I love investing. The more boring the business, the better. Everyone wants to get invested in the most exciting thing. I know my son is a huge Tesla fan, and he's made a ton of money as Tesla's gone through the roof on there. But if you actually look at the underlying value of a Tesla, its PE ratio, its profits to earnings ratio, is astronomical.
It's like 400 or something insane like that.
Exactly. It's 100 times more than a small business would be, because there's belief in how just exciting it is. So we like things that are really, really boring and predictably profitable.
Yeah. Little cash cows. Well, look, it's your business. I'm sorry, but hardware online, it's like brilliant. It's a little cash cow. It's lean, just knobs.com, no bells and whistles. It's not sexy. It does what it needs to do. It provides
knobs.co, by the way, if anybody's looking to buy knobs.
No, and I love that. So Dave, you mentioned the 3 to 6 months, that typical, benchmark for our cash that, we should have access to, but you did mention that line of credit. I just want to clarify. You're not saying in your case that they're mutually exclusive, that you opted not to have a cash cushion and just to have a line of credit option, or is that what you did?
That's what we did.
Okay. So that's one.
Yeah. As long as we can access the money, I saw no need to have money sitting there. If I was to look at my bank account and see that there's a whole chunk of money sitting there, to me, why? You got almost no return whatsoever on a savings account. It's so incredibly minimal.
Right. As long as you're making,
as long as I can get money when I need it.
And possibly that the return you're making on this money in the meantime is anyway higher than whatever you're gonna be paying for the line of credit if you take the money. Right.
Yeah.
So at what point, for listeners, at what point do we say, yeah, I'm ready to use my next $10,000, $20,000, $100,000 to delve into some project, whether it be real estate or business investing. And what I mean is, and I know you've worked with a lot of people. Would you say, listen, have you saved enough for whatever a person's goals are? They maybe need to be putting their kids to college. Do they need to marry off children? Like, what are some things that you would say to people? Do this first before you do this, or is there no order? Is there a system here? Is there an ideal order for you guys?
So I have two responses to that. One, never, ever wait to invest. This was actually one of the big problems we had when we were starting off and we had all this money coming in and we didn't know what to do with it because we had no education. It was just sitting and accumulating, and really money burns a hole in your pocket. And it doesn't get easier to learn about investment when you've got $1 million sitting around there than when you've got $20 sitting out there. So we encourage people, start investing as soon as possible. It's going to get easier over time. So if you have a very little bit of money that you can invest that, because it's just going to get the momentum building, and it's not going to be a block. The money we had sitting in our bank account, because we didn't know how to invest it, literally was a block to making more money.
Wow.
Because the more money we got in, the more stress this money was causing us that we didn't know how to invest it well. If it was $20 sitting in the bank account, we wouldn't have been stressed about it. But as it became tens of thousands of dollars, we're like, we should be investing it. We don't know how to do it. So I encourage people, one, invest as soon as possible. Two, get yourself an education. A lot of these things we're talking about right now, they're not the types of things you want to get your education through falling on your face with. You don't want to get an education through private equity deals and go into the wrong one and lose that money potentially.
Right.
So really start the learning process as soon as possible. Start investing money in very safe things, like Chana mentioned, index funds like the S&P 500. You can start that immediately. It's a good, safe area. It already built up momentum, but get yourself a strong education.
So something I was going to say is like an analogy to a different area of life. When our son was 2.5, that was the first time I put a knife in his hands. I think actually his preschool put a knife in his hands, and I was like, oh, if they can do it, I can do it. And then it was great. And he started cutting up vegetables. Now he's almost 17 and he chops vegetables like a ninja. He's like with the chef's knife, like boom, 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 boom. I could just ask him to make dinner and he will. And you don't just walk into a kitchen and know how to make dinner. First, you have to pick up a knife and use it and mess up and cut yourself. And you cut yourself a few times at the beginning. It doesn't matter if you're 3 or if you're 30, you are going to make mistakes and you're going to do it wrong and you're going to fumble all over yourself. The thing is, when you're 3, you heal much faster. So I would say the same thing about the $20 versus the, $1 million. If you mess up with $20, so you mess up with $20, big whoop. When you mess up with $1 million, it's so much more painful. So if you start investing with the little bits that you have, knowing that no matter when you start, you're going to make mistakes. And there are things you're going to learn the hard way, no matter how much research and how much education you get. There's just a certain amount of savvy that comes through life experience that cannot be replaced by just reading books. So that's like an added piece that I would say. It's also something we say about giving to charity. People wait until they're wealthy to give to charity. And it's like, no, you make your first $10 on your lemonade stand, give $1 or $2 away to charity.
Absolutely.
You get in the habit of investing in the same way that you get in the habit of giving to charity. It just becomes part of your mindset.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with that. And I think, yes, I mean, you couldn't have said it better, but then there's the question, okay, so with $20, right? So every month I could put $20 in the stock market, no problem, easy, it's going to grow over time. And then maybe in a couple of months, I'll increase it to 50 and then it'll be $100 depending on, but then the question is, when we talk to Chana and Dave about private equity investing in real estate, investing in businesses, I must have had a savings pattern to get to a point to put my first 10K, 30K, 60K, there has to be some amount more significant than $20. And that is a process in and of itself.
I mean, yes and no. In a way, if all you're doing is putting into an S&P 500 index fund, and you keep doing that with $20, over time, that fund is going to have $10,000 in it. And then you can say, hey, I have $10,000 to invest in private equity. Like, it's not like you have to have money sitting in the bank.
There you go.
And the idea of, having money sitting doing nothing for my kids' weddings. I'm like, no, you have your money growing for you. And
Yes.
when your kids get married, your passive income from your investments should ideally pay for that wedding. And if it can't, so maybe you sell some of those private equity investments, or you sell some of your stock portfolio to pay for that wedding, whatever it is.
Exactly. And I'm glad we clarified that, because this is an important point. Just because you want to get to a more sophisticated investment doesn't mean you have to waste using air quotes here, all that time of compounding that could be happening as you're building up to that bigger investment with a potential greater return than maybe the stock market will give you.
Exactly. And to Hannah's point about children and weddings, I remember hearing from one investor who every time he had a child, he bought an investment property, knowing that, okay, you'd buy a place and put it on, say, a 15-year mortgage. And by the time this kid turned 18, the property would be owned full and clear, just paid off by the rent that it was bringing in. And that was, instead of putting some money into a college fund and having it grow, whatever, you'd just own an entire property, and that property could be the cash cow, paying for college, paying for weddings, paying for whatever that kid needed. So every kid that was born, there was a property that was bought and would be paid off by its own income during that kid's childhood.
That's really cool.
I love that. I like that so much. Now let's talk about, you talked about education, Chana. I think it was you, Chana, who said, like, you have, or maybe it was Dave, you have to learn about these things. So people are probably wondering, okay, so where do I start learning? And I know you guys have resources. So talk to us about your different resources that you offer, that you help people through the process of learning.
So there are two things that I would say are just great starter points for people. One is the Cash Machine, the book, which we've been talking about a lot, because it's such a fun read and it's such a great conversation opener. And the other is the Money Mindset Challenge. Money Mindset Challenge is something that we created as a product of just working with so many people and talking to so many people and noticing that there were just patterns that for so many of us, like, the idea of even thinking about learning about investments makes so many people freeze because their mindset doesn't even let them believe that learning is possible. Even though they're like really highly educated, smart people,
right?
A lot of the Jews living in Jerusalem, they're really intelligent people, but you start talking about money and they just turn to jello. So working on your mindset just creates a space for you to then have a file folder in your brain that's capable of receiving an education about money. So I think those two things going together, Money Mindset Madness, it's super affordable. We made it really fun. We packed it with cartoons and with stories. Every single lesson has a story in it because we're super passionate about story. And we made it really fun and accessible. And we help people identify the beliefs that are blocking them from moving forward financially and learn how to reverse those. And then also learn core financial principles and mindsets that really help wealthy people build wealth.
I love that. I love that. And I know, Dave, you also run a program, right, on the financial fundamentals. You mentioned it earlier.
Right. So financial fundamentals is much more when you're ready for a deep dive. You've gone through and said, okay, I know that I want to work on getting my money stuff right. And okay, now I'm ready for the content. Now pour it in. So it goes through a lot of the same lessons, truthfully, that are in the cash machine, but really much more in depth. The cash machine, all the lessons have to be a little bit buried because this isn't a dry.
We got to get you to read about this stuff, right?
Exactly.
It's a story. It's a love story. Like there's only so much finance you could talk about in a love story.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
And so, we wanted this to be a page turner. We wanted the book to appeal to people who would never go into the finance section of Barnes and Nobles and pull a book off the shelf, and they'd be incredibly intimidated by that. So lessons are buried here and there throughout the story, and they come across kind of naturally in the story. But this is financial fundamentals is saying, okay, you're ready to get yourself a real education. Let's go step by step through all of these different areas of expenditures. See where you can be spending less and having more money to be investing. Now let's talk about investment vehicles. Where can you be putting that money to be getting strong returns? And it is not meant to be a super advanced. There's all kinds of investment techniques that I wouldn't even touch, that are super advanced. And there's some that we're involved in that I wouldn't necessarily give to somebody who's starting out. That's why it's fundamentals. It's meant to be things that anybody can take and start implementing right away. And then later people can go in and research, okay, I want to go into derivatives, options, whatever other area is out there, but it looks at, okay, this is what real estate options are going to be versus stock market options. Just goes through the fundamentals point by point.
Talk to us about the day-to-day Mason couple when it comes to money, in terms of how do you keep each other accountable? How do you create new goals for yourselves? And, just how does the dynamic work?
That's really interesting, because when it comes to the day-to-day, we actually haven't changed so much. We're a little bit, it's embarrassing to say, because we should be these like super organized people when it comes to money, because we teach so many people about money. But when people come to us and say, how do I keep a budget? We're like, because we don't really keep a budget. What happens is that naturally the both of us tend to lean on the frugal side. And so we splurge on organic produce. We eat a whole food plant-based diet, which by nature is pretty cheap. We don't eat out. We don't drink. We don't party. We don't go to events. Like our life is, we don't own a car. We rent a very affordable apartment. So it's just like our lifestyle is so inexpensive that for us, a splurge is like buying asparagus and the really fancy mushrooms. And those expenses are so minimal. Like we don't even buy coffee. So those expenses are so minimal that it just doesn't matter that much at the end of the month. So we don't tend to talk about money as far as like day-to-day expenses. But we do talk about investments, and we do talk about how we're building our future. And that tends to come up a lot. So one conversation that, keeps bubbling up to the surface and then going back down is me saying, I really want to own a home. And then we look at the numbers and we're just like, for us in Jerusalem, the way the numbers work, we're just so much better off renting. And so then we go back to normal, and then it comes back again. And I'm aware of the fact that this is an emotional conversation rather than a logical conversation. Right. And that makes it, and because we're so open, we can just be aware of that.
Right. And I like that you said that, because I honestly, I don't have a budget. I mean, after I got out of debt, thankfully, I do believe that if you're in debt, like you got to just get yourself on a budget and get out of that debt. Right. But after I did that, we don't really have a strict budget, but what we do is we are so in touch with the cash flow. Like we know what's coming in and where it needs to go. And then and then whatever is the, let's say, extra, where do we want it to go? Right. So it's not like we have these line items where you have this much to spend here and that much to spend there, but it's just a very conscious sense of what money's coming in, what money needs to go out. It needs to go to this goal, to that purpose. Right. So that, I think everybody has to find what works for them, but the underlying principle is that we need to be talking about these things, and you said, we're talking about the investments, what's happening, and, what's the next thing. So talking about the next thing, as entrepreneurs and as, business owners, we often, and I know Chana and I have talked about this privately before, the old ceiling becomes the new floor, and then there's a new ceiling, right? There's a new frontier to cross. What are you guys feeling now as the new, let's say, financial frontier, or the new area that you're being called to growth, where you're starting to feel the resistance, but you have to go there? Where do you see yourselves?
Oh, for sure in investing in businesses in a more serious way.
What do you mean by serious? With more capital?
Either as seed investments, venture capital, acquiring businesses and cleaning them up. That's kind of more the direction we're going, I think.
Yeah, a lot, really just the last couple of weeks, I've actually put a lot of energy into looking at how you can acquire real estate or businesses without needing a ton of money. That's one of the big issues, is people usually expect they need a lot of money to be getting into various deals. But if you stop and think creatively, there are often ways of getting into deals without needing a giant amount of capital to get into that. And I've been studying people who have been doing it successfully. Interestingly enough, a lot of it comes from being a good listener. I'm hearing this come up over and over again, that very often somebody is selling a business or a property because there's something that is not working for them. And if you can actually stop and listen to what that is and come up with a solution that answers their problem, then you don't necessarily need to have all this money up front. You're still going to be paying them money, but it could be structured somewhat differently. So for instance, if somebody owns a property and they own it outright, and they've got a reason they want to be getting rid of it, well, maybe they don't need the entire amount up front. Maybe they actually like the idea of having very strong monthly income coming in. Maybe they'll actually be the bank and give seller financing to it. That's just one of many, many examples of how people are able to find deals without needing a lot of money. Or maybe there's an aspect you can add to the business and be going in and help making it stronger, and the business earnings themselves can actually be buying out the person who wants to retire. Or you see this a lot with somebody passes away and the heirs don't really know how to run the business, and there's a business in crisis. Okay, you're able to step into that business, you're able to make it more successful, and the business success is able to be the buyout. So you don't need a big wad of cash necessarily to get in the beginning. So I've been looking at a lot of these different ways of how do people acquire properties, businesses, without just needing a ton of cash. And if you can be getting into businesses or getting into real estate without needing all this money up front, then your growth is really just, there isn't so much of a ceiling towards that growth.
And I love that answer. It goes back to what your wife said about the creativity, right? And when you were saying that, Chana, I thought about also your work with Hold That Thought and all the mindset work that you do, that when we're really stressed, we can't be very creative. We're automatically, got to that tunnel vision.
Exactly. One of the things that I've noticed is, goes together hand in hand. Safety breeds creativity and play. And creativity and play are where all growth comes from.
Yes.
Our personal growth, our spiritual growth, our financial growth. And for me, really, the past month, I've really gained an insight into how much money is simply energy.
Yes.
It's just pure divine energy. And if you can tap into it that way, it's like you can become like a major pipeline of light and energy. But if you associate money with darkness, so you miss out on the opportunity of how much light you can bring into the world through the wealth that you build and also through the wealth that you contribute.
Right.
And because you make yourself small so that you don't receive so much of that financial light, you unfortunately don't get to have so much impact.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that wealth allows for impact. And if you want to be somebody who impacts the world in a really big way, you've got to make yourself comfortable with having a lot of cash flow running through your system.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. One of the things that stands out from this conversation is the alignment between both of you. You mentioned that you're both more on the frugal side. You also both evidently love business and love geeking out on these things. You love real estate. But one who might be listening might say, but I mean, I don't understand. My husband's into real estate, or I'm into real estate, but my husband's not, or I like, there's not always, you don't always find that within a couple, there is that much alignment, or I love to spend, or he loves to spend. I'm more frugal. So was this always the case, was there some navigating that happened where you both kind of became more like each other? And if it was always the case, how do you suggest couples could navigate this?
I think it goes back to what we were saying about learning and communicating. A lot of our financial stress, like we said, came from really being misaligned. And so we started learning together, getting education together, and implementing things together. Do either of us love real estate? I'm not really. I don't think we're that excited about real estate, but
really excited about making money.
But we saw how much marital stress it caused being in debt. And we started realizing, we'd get really excited about things that could help us get out of debt and be able to finance the future we want, living here in Israel, being able to give charity, help our son, be part of our members of our community,
write books,
have a big Shabbat table, write our books. These are sort of the visions that we had. So a lot of the things we're investing in really are not that exciting. What's exciting to us is our vision for our lives that are being fueled by that. And it's been brainstorming that together and planning together and researching and getting education together that's really brought us into alignment.
And thank you for that answer. I really appreciate it, because it just says, get so clear with your spouse on the why. And I bet you when you start having those conversations, even if you're completely different, because you have a love relationship, because you love each other, and because you empathize, you start understanding each other, you can come to a very strong why that drives both of you.
And we also compartmentalize things. There's certain aspects that Dave's more interested in, certain aspects that I'm more interested in. My Hebrew's stronger, so I deal with all of our Israeli finances. He deals with all the American finances. We definitely compartmentalize, because sometimes it's silly for both people to become full experts in everything. Sure. But being on the same page is really helpful. And we both came into our marriage into business. That's something that we both walked in the door with. So that was really helpful, because it's something that we care about. But if we weren't into business, we would just be putting money into, like I said before, the S&P 500 index fund, and keeping it really simple. And we know so many people who do that, who gain financial independence in their early 30s or late 20s. Like, it's totally doable, not on fancy jobs. Mm-hmm. So it's just,
you won't do that from the S&P 500. All the people I've spoken to who, by the way, who did get themselves to financial independence in their 20s, they were all in the real estate area.
Oh, that's true. So one thing for us was being willing to humble ourselves to a lower standard of living than we had before. So we went from living in a big fancy house in Jerusalem to moving to the Golan Heights, where we lived in a small house that was owned by the Moshav that we lived in. And our rent was $250 a month.
Whoa.
Yeah. And we majorly downsized our lives so that we could more easily pay down our debts. And making choices like that, just, it helps, it helps to say, like, I'm willing to give up my, the second car. I'm willing to live in a smaller place. And you don't need a fancy education to do that. You just have to be willing to make difficult choices. And one of those difficult choices might be, I'm going to buckle down and sit down and learn some math and learn, read some finance books, even though it's not exciting, because it will make space for the things in my life that are exciting.
Yes. Yes.
South Africa is a product of us buckling down and getting a boring education. And it's like, but South Africa was so cool.
Exactly. Yeah. It goes back to that, having that clear why, right? As the motivator behind everything, and getting so clear on what are your values as a family, and as a couple. And you use the word brainstorming, coming regularly to the table to talk about these things. Say, wait, is this really what we want? Like my husband and I were having a conversation yesterday because we just finished a bas mitzvah. Okay, what's the next thing? Like, what's the really exciting thing that we're working towards, right? And these are important conversations to have. Otherwise, you just go through the motions and the money just goes and goes. Is it going to where you want it to go? Is it growing in the way you want it to grow? Is it going to fund the things that you want it to fund? All right, guys, let's wrap it up with what I call Jewish Money Matters, fill in the blanks. And you both get to answer. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's a part of the show where I'm going to give you an open-ended statement and you'll finish it with the first thing that comes to mind. All right. All right, let's start with Chana. When I give Meiser or Tzedakah, I like to give to?
Like to give to Leket. It's an organization that they how do you say Leket? They glean behind the farmers and collect all that extra food. And they also go to restaurants and collect leftover food. So to Leket and to Crossroads, which is an organization that helps Anglo at-risk teens. Wow. Been sitting on the board of that organization for the past 17 years. So,
wow. Yeah. What about you, Dave?
I like to give to everyone. And that's one of the points we talk about a lot with tzedakah, is that there's kind of our big chunks that we give to things like Leket. There's an organization I give a lot to called Siva, which actually helps people who are blind for about $50. You can actually reverse blindness for certain causes of blindness in the third world. And so it gives sight to the blind for a really low amount of money. So I give a lot there, but there's something about giving to each and every person you pass on the street who's asking. And we go to the shuk, there's always people asking.
Yes.
The very act of, even though it's small amounts, even though it's, 2 shekels here, 2 shekels there, it's giving to everyone. It trains you to be a giver. Absolutely. And it says that I'm not going to walk past you and ignore you. I see you, I'm gonna make eye contact with you. And it makes those connections. It makes people know that people do care. And the emotional impact of giving to everyone, I think, is huge. So I want to put that out there.
I got chills when you said that, because I'm very big on this. I'm like the nerd who will always lower the window. And even though the light already turned green, I'm scrambling through my wallet and I'm giving and that interaction with this random stranger. And sometimes it's the most beautiful interaction where he says, God bless you. And I say, God bless you too. Have a blessed day. I mean, it's priceless. It's just so important. And by the way, our kids are watching. So yes, I really am with you guys on that. All right. I'd like to make more money because
I have a desire to sit on lots of different boards and have lots of impact. We've talked about this my whole marriage. And also I have so many people I want to meet and places I want to see.
What about you, Dave?
I would like to buy my wife a house again. That's part of it. That was a big thing for her, getting that house. And we did lose that house because of our whole debt aspect. And I also really like to get our teachings out to the world. I'd like to be creating a space where people can be coming in and learning. And you know what? Money can really help us take what we've done and take our books and really launch them in a much bigger way.
For sure. Something I wish I'd learned about money growing up is
that it's not taboo, that it's good to talk about, that you can't learn about it in school.
That if you accumulate it early, you'll buy yourself incredible amounts of freedom later in your life.
Money, spiritual or physical?
Yes.
Yes to both.
It's a physical manifestation of spiritual ideas. And I actually think over time it's becoming more and more spiritual, because most of our transactions don't even involve actually touching money.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Right. What do you say, Dave?
Look, I've been so into in Daf Yomi and Masechet Tainus, and it's like it is so clear. Like the rain in there is Parnasa, and it is so clear that it is all min shemayim.
Translate all that.
It's a Jewish audience. So it is very much hitting this lesson over and over again. It's that it comes down very, very spiritually.
Yeah.
And that it can be a real source of blessing.
Something I splurge on unapologetically is, I know you're not splurgers, but come on, asparagus, please.
Barefoot shoes.
I'm into that too recently. Yeah.
I just bought really, really nice barefoot boots, went all the way to Tel Aviv to get them. Very excited.
I'd actually thought you were going to go with, I'll say this one, having someone come into the house and help out with dishes and kitchen prep and take certain tasks that just take a lot of time off our plates so we can be devoting ourselves to things that we really want to be accomplishing. Yeah.
Nice. All right, Chana, spender or saver or investor? What do you choose?
Investor.
Yeah. What about you, Dave?
Oh, such an investor.
Well, it sounds like you were never spenders, right? Like it was not, part of your natures from the get-go.
No, we were lose moneyers.
Right after college, I backpacked around the world, and it was my goal to keep myself under $5 a day. I was hitchhiking through like these third world countries. No, I was definitely not a spender at all. The only time we really spent big was with the house, and we really got suckered into kind of that. Yeah. It's a very poor choice.
Yeah. I'm very interesting because I really have a spender tendency, but I've always been an investor. So I've always hidden money from myself, so I won't spend it, and I just make it grow. Don't touch it, Yael. All right. Today, I'm most grateful for.
In this moment, I'm most grateful for this type of conversation and the ease and the play and the laughter and the connection that's happening here around a topic that used to cause us so much pain, that it's turned into something that we use to bring light into the world. It's really beautiful. Cool.
I think I'm most grateful for the freedom that allows me to learn and grow and teach and just spend so much of my days exploring and getting more knowledge and finding ways to teach them.
Beautiful. And finally, Chana Mason, and I believe Jewish Money Matters because
I'm Chana Mason, and I believe Jewish Money Matters because the Jewish people have a mission to be a light amongst the nations. And part of how we do that is by bringing so much beauty and wealth and abundance and teachings and knowledge and just glowing it out into the world unapologetically.
Dave, I believe Jewish Money Matters because
I'm Dave Mason, and I believe Jewish Money Matters because I see so many people dedicating so much of their time just trying to get enough to get by in work that doesn't light them up. And if they're able to fix their money matters, they're able to really dedicate themselves towards the growth and to the life that they really want to have.
Amen to that. Beautiful. Guys, this was so much fun. Keep up the awesome work. Tell us where we can find you. Let's get that book into people's hands. Let's get people in that 21-day challenge that's going to change them and take them to the next level. Tell us where we can grab all that.
So the Cash Machine, by the way, we're happy to give free digital copies to anyone who wants at buildmycashmachine.com, buildmycashmachine.com. And from there, you can go to moneymindsetmadness.com and find out about the challenge. And
that's the exciting stuff. So I'm sure you'll put links in the show notes.
Absolutely. We'll make sure that everybody has that. Thank you so much, guys. This was really a pleasure. Keep up the awesome work.
Thank you so much.